My apologies. It's ready to go whenever you are.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm just going to call the Special Committee of the Whole to order. It is 6:33. Sorry that we started late. We had experiencing some technical difficulties, but we're back on cue here. So first of all, approval of the agenda. We only have the one item. I will assume that everybody is okay with that. Any discussion on the agenda? Seeing none, I will assume that everybody, unless you stick up your hand right now, that you're okay with proceeding forward. Public participation, we have no members registered to speak tonight, so we're going to go straight into new business. This is efficient. 4.1.
Doug, you might want to do the territorial acknowledgement and roll call.
And sorry, I apologize for that. Yep, I would first of all, I want to acknowledge that with respect that we are meeting on the traditional territories of the Lekwungen speaking people, and we are honored to have the opportunity to build strong working relationships with the people of the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. And just a quick roll call, Councillor Parkinson, just indicate if you're here or present.
I'm present.
Councillor Baxter.
Present.
Councillor Day.
I'm here.
Councillor Jensen.
Here.
Councillor Logan.
Present.
And Mayor Martin.
Present.
Okay. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Jen. So Jen Hepting, our Director of Finance, who's going to go over the 2022 budget introduction and highlights, service plan review, our general operating budget.
Thank you, Chair Kobayashi. I trust everyone can see my screen.
Yes, we're good.
Excellent. So tonight will be the first of a series of special committee and then into council meetings that will make up this year's budget deliberations. I'll take a moment tonight, just walk us through the timeline that's before us, and then we will jump into the operating budgets for each of the city's service areas, with the exception of our sewer utility. That is what we have scheduled for tonight. Last night we did meet on a number of topics that will impact the draft 22 to 26 financial plan. Some of those items have already been incorporated into the draft that's been published on this agenda, and other items will follow. So in particular, tonight's agenda includes the operating budgets for all of our general service areas. So the fire service increase that was discussed at greater length last night, that has been incorporated. The Parks and Rec master plan, we touched on a number of capital program implementation items, as well as the road DCC capital program. Those items will be forthcoming later in budget deliberations as we get into our capital budget review. So like I mentioned tonight, we're going to have a look at the highlights of the 2022 budget, in particular, the factors to consider in what is driving the draft proposed property tax increase. We're then going to look at the operating budgets, both revenues and expenses. That is tonight. Moving into next week, we'll be looking at special initiatives and the city's capital program. Returning March 1st, we'll have a review of our last service area, being that for sewer operations. And we'll also have a look at our asset management update. So in particular, reserve transfers, projections. We'll also comment on grant funding, in particular the COVID safe restart and how we propose to continue to utilize those funds. The intention is that by the end of the March 1st Special Committee of the Whole meeting, the committee has seen the draft financial plan in its entirety, and the committee is prepared to make recommendations of that plan to council. The staff will then return in March And the intention is to introduce the financial plan bylaw mid-March, and we're targeting adoption the end of March.
Jen,
then-
can I, sorry to interrupt you. Could you
Not
pull
at
your
all.
mic away from your mouth? It's hitting and we're getting all kinds of feedback here.
Is that better?
Yeah, so
Okay,
far.
great.
Okay.
And we're then targeting to return with tax rates in April and early May. So this timeline sees us in accordance with our legislated deadlines, and it's our expectation that this is sufficient time for council to review the budget. Recent years, we've seen a shift in how we compile our budget, in particular in that it really is prepared from a service delivery perspective. As you're well aware, we recently completed the 2022 service review, and coming out of that series of finance and governance meetings, the recommendations made by committee were approved by council late last month. This draft budget that is before you tonight has incorporated those recommendations. So we'll take a minute now to understand what is driving the draft property tax increase. When we last met during service review, we were anticipating an overall increase of approximately 5.4%. The draft budget before you tonight has come in at about that amount. So we're hovering just under 5.5%. And it's really important now that we understand the factors driving that increase. We start with looking at our existing service delivery. This draft budget proposes just over a 3% tax increase to maintain our existing service delivery. The primary reasons we're sitting at about a 3% increase. One, labor contracts. So we will highlight some of the implications of our labor contracts, in particular in the area of policing. So we have, for the 2022 budget, increased our budget based on estimations of the recently finalized RCMP policing contract. That is driving part of that increase. We've also had a number of restructures throughout the organization, and the financial implications of those restructures to support existing service delivery are part of the factor driving that 3%. It's important too that we consider inflation overall. So BC's inflation, right now we are sitting at about 3%. That's the last year's average. And there are a number of cost considerations when we look at specific costs, and in particular in our public works related service delivery areas, where supplies, we are having to factor in cost increases to support those. As was mentioned during service review, the compilation of this draft budget, it started last August and into September in anticipation of service review. So these budgets, they really are reviewed by the operating teams in detail to really understand all of the cost considerations before we bring them forth during service review. We then have a number of previously approved service increases. So as you'll recall, during last year's budget deliberations, there was a number of increased services that were introduced midway through the year. And as a result, in this year, we are realizing the full cost implications. In a moment, I'll jump to a slide and we'll remind ourselves of what those previously approved service increases are. Now, we are proposing that we utilize some of our new construction taxation. Today, we are estimating approximately $1.2 million in new construction taxation. This draft budget proposes that about 3/4 of that be allocated to fund core operating and increased operating expenses. So operating expenses ultimately that are derived as a result of community growth. And I will go through each of those. This draft budget then proposes that the remaining quarter of that new construction taxation, or approximately $300,000, be set aside to reserves. We need to consider the operating impacts of new capital. So specifically, capital expenditures that were approved and actioned in prior years that have a delayed related maintenance or operating expenditure. So in particular, the city is implementing and configuring Tempest software right now, and that software does have related increased licensing and maintenance costs associated. That's the primary driver of that next line, the $32,000. So overall, we're looking at about a 3.25% property tax increase to support existing service delivery. The policing e-com transition was highlighted during service review. Now, since service review, I have not received any more definitive or concrete information regarding this proposed transition, which is ultimately going to see the responsibility for supporting these costs, these dispatch costs for the South Island Policing Dispatch Center, downloaded to the local level, to the municipalities. If those costs are implemented as has been mentioned, but only in it, this is still early days. We haven't received final information on this, but if those are implemented, we're looking at a 0.5% tax increase this year to support that. So that brings us to 3.75% increase. Now, there was a number of new services proposed for this year. Some of these were proposed under a prior service review and some under the more recent. We will review each of those as we get into each of the service areas. The only one I wish to, well, two I wish to highlight that we haven't yet discussed, the Pacific Center Family Services Association. Since service review, we have received a request to increase the city's financial support for their community outreach and prevention program. And so should council support that increase, that would be an additional $45,000 per year to that organization, just shy of a 0.3% tax increase. The Green Teams of Greater Victoria, similarly, we have a fee-for-service arrangement, and they provide a number of services in conjunction with our parks team for parks and trails maintenance. They too have reached out, and so we'll review those with the park service area, but wanted to just highlight those two. We haven't touched on those previously, but they are before you in this draft budget. We're proposing that some additional new construction taxation help fund those increased services. And that's what brings us to that about 4.5% tax increase. And then, as you're well familiar, proposing an additional 1% to support the Sustainable Infrastructure Reserve Fund per policy. And so those are the factors there that's driving that 5.5%. And I will return to this information. I just want to take a moment to remind us of the previously approved service increases. In the 2020 to 24 financial plan, we supported increased resourcing for HR, and that sees that increased resourcing take effect in 2022. Similarly, with the IT service area, under last year's financial plan, we supported increased servicing last year. We're realizing full cost implications this year. Policing, we have seen an increase in strength of approximately, or of 1 member annually. And so that $190,000 there is the proposed strength increase for this year. Fire services, again, we had a mid-year hire of 2 new career firefighters last year. Full cost implications realized this year. Boulevard beautification. This is further enhancement in that service area, as was endorsed under the 21 service review and the 21 to 25 financial plan for the 2022 calendar year. And lastly, enhanced storm sewer maintenance that was introduced in 2021 and full cost implications will be realized this year. With these increased services being the result of community growth and development, we are proposing that we utilize a portion of our new construction taxation. This here's a breakdown that I've just mentioned of how we're proposing we utilize this new construction taxation. As council is aware, under policy, the city utilizes new construction taxation primarily twofold. So either increased operating expenditures as a result of community growth, community development, or we utilize this to set aside into reserves to help fund the replacement of the existing infrastructure, again, as a result of community growth and development. And sorry, towards infrastructure that's needed as a result of community growth and development. So high level, this draft budget proposes 3/4 of it is going to support operating expenditures. 1/4 is going to support additional reserve transfers. This is in addition to the 1% that we propose annually. That $294,000 is a figure that if we had made our 1% increase transfer in the year 2020, that would be the additional base in our reserve transfer in this year. And so we're proposing, if we utilize the new construction taxation to the extent of an additional $300,000, we will get caught up in a sense. We have spoken at some length, and we will highlight it later in this year's budget deliberations. We are looking to close that gap. We are not sustainably funded for our existing infrastructure, and this is one tactic that will get us that much closer to being sustainably funded. So that's a somewhat long-winded introduction of overall where this draft budget is sitting. And I would like to pause now for any questions of committee or any comment before we jump into the individual service area operating budgets.
So I'll just take that before I take questions from council. We also thought we'd take this a break before we proceed, just to discuss the number sitting at 5.48%. What's the comfort level of all the councillors? I have my own opinion, but that's my opinion. We certainly would like to hear from the rest of council and what you think, if you think that's too high, or just to get your opinion. So it's an important step here. So I'll look for comments and questions at this point in time. We'll start with Councillor Dave.
Thank you. I believe that staying in the neighborhood of 5% is something that the community probably will understand that we need to do, given the inflationary pressures within every community as a result of our COVID experience. Really, that is, I don't think anyone would expect us to be able to escape it.
Okay. Any other questions, Councillor Dave, before I go to the next person?
I do have questions. I'm just going to turn my video off because it's not working anyways right now, and I think it's messing up the sound. I'm just curious. I think that maybe it's not doable this year, but I think Colwood should be working towards increasing the community's understanding of our budgeting process. So, one of the tenets of democracy is really engaging the community. And when Jen started out, she talked about her service delivery perspective for the budget, which I think is really good. I would really like to see the city work towards increasing the level of understanding in the community, maybe by some sort of town hall type meeting to help people feel empowered to ask the questions, because numbers can be very intimidating, and certainly acronyms can be very intimidating. So I think that we could find a way to engage the community more on what's happening with our budgets. And with the new construction taxation, I think it's important that that is actually written out and not just used as an abbreviation in the financial plan, just for that reason, so that everyone understands. For the increase in the consolidated highlights, I was curious, we're using about 8% of the new construction taxation for increased pressures. And I'd like to know, does that meet or exceed the increase in population that we had in Colwood? Did we have 8% growth in the last year, or less or more?
Staff.
Through the chair, I can certainly
Thank you.
comment on the increases that we've factored into the information that we utilize within this draft budget. When we look at the BC Stats sub-regional population estimates, we're seeing a 2.5% growth. That was, I believe, between 2019 and 2020, the most recent information that they had. And so we've applied 2.5% in terms of when we provide the added context within each service area. Could it be slightly different from 2.5? Certainly. Is it 8%? No.
Thank you very much. Does that answer your questions, Councillor Day?
Yes, sorry, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll go to the next one. Councillor Baxter.
Yeah, I just want to say that deciding what needs to be done and what needs to be funded in the community is complicated. There's a lot of trade-offs, and you've got to work out those trade-offs, work out, you know, what's going to get funded and what isn't. And I think to try and govern by budgeting to a number based without looking at what's behind it is not a good way to govern. And I look at what's behind this number, this 5.4%, and I find it hard to argue with any of it. You know, the 0.5% that goes to policing econ transition, we can't avoid that. That is something put upon us by other levels of government, and we just have to accept it. Things like the branch drop-off and the Colwood cleanup, the extra cost there. I've always heard that the citizens of Colwood really appreciate that service and want it to be better than it has been. So, you know, all of these things, the fire paid on call, I think an inevitable decision because of the change in the way people volunteer in communities. How that worked 30 years ago was very different from the way it works today. And that's not a bad thing or a good thing, it's just a thing. And it's something we have to deal with. So overall, I don't see anything I want to cut from this budget that I think we should cut from this budget. So that's what makes me accept this number. Not because I like the number particularly. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. Councillor Parkinson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Frankly, I can live with a number. Nobody likes any taxes at all, and now going up 5.5% a little bit much. To help me sort of figure out my thoughts on it, I went through all the different increases, and I sort of looked, when we talk about fire and police costs, as Michael suggested, we got the paid on call and the night shift for the fire department, and we have another officer at RCMP, and we have increased costs for RCMP. That alone came to 3.49%. I think that includes e-com, and we could discuss e-com, whether it should be a full year or a half year or something. So there's maybe something to discuss. The sustainable infrastructure is a total of 2.81%. Frankly, we did duck and hide from that cost in COVID times, thinking we weren't sure how tough it's going to be. I think it's a good practice to get back to where we should be, and we could nitpick about exactly what should and shouldn't be in sustainable infrastructure. But essentially, without a real deep dive, the numbers we have are the best we're going to get. So I have to support that 2.81. Otherwise, I think it's just we're just robbing Peter to pay Paul. We need to put that money away. So I can't really argue at 2.81. A lot of the other numbers, I mean, they're done. We've hired the additional HR help, the additional IT help. We're not going to unhire them just because all of a sudden we're scared of a budget number. Things that we agreed in our service review, storm sewers, boulevards, and then the 3.04 just for the additional costs because everything goes up. Again, those are all, to my mind, done. When I go through here and I go, if we wanted to move, where would we move? And the only items really to discuss would be the bike lane maintenance for $8,000, I think. Branch drop-offs and Colwood cleanup, we could discuss maybe. Irrigation in parks, I'm not sure if that's started yet or not, but again, it's something we discussed at service review and thought it was a good idea. And then I guess the specific Center Family Services, that's on top of the initial amount we had promised them, Jen, is that correct?
That's correct. It's in addition to the increased amount that the city supported last year.
So again, I guess it's fair game to discuss, but it's what Pacific Center does in the community. I couldn't deprive them of that money. So if there was heat to be taken over that $45,000, I guess I'd take my share of it because I just think that the services they provide are essential right now at this time anyway. So to me, it doesn't really matter whether I like the end number or not. I think it's been well done. A lot of it is too late to do anything about, even if we wanted to. So yeah, I live with the number. I'm okay with that number. So thank you, Chair. It's my thoughts.
Thanks very much, Councillor Parkinson. Councillor Logan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think my colleagues before me articulated very well why I will support the 5.48%. Not that I'm happy with that number, of course, but many of the biggest ticket item there, one of the biggest ticket items is something as our that is a result of our own doing, and that was as a result of the 0% increase a couple of years ago, and we're still paying for that. So this is not a surprise to me. We can certainly nickel and dime the budget, and I think all those line items are well justified. We hear people say that they are demanding these services like branch drop off and the Colwood cleanup. If we want to lower the tax amount, then perhaps we look at other services. Do we reduce the amount of snow clearing? Probably not, because we get roasted. Do we reduce the amount of lane kilometers we repair and pave? Probably not. So, when we look at these service reviews and nickel and dime, we also, although there's some short-term gratification for us, the long-term effects of cutting those services end up becoming more expensive. So again, the 0% is haunting us, continuing to haunt us. And that's why they're never good, as well intended as they may be in that particular time. So I think in order to maintain a level of service and to not fall behind, 5.48 is reasonable, especially when it comes with increased fire and police protection and some of the other items that are listed on this list. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Jensen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be brief. That nobody really likes a tax increase in general, but as was indicated, we won awards for our sustainable infrastructure program, and then we promptly stopped putting those funds aside. So I think we can't ignore that, and I do want to see us get back to where we're properly funding that. So I believe this is easily articulated. What I see here is mostly public safety and infrastructure, and it's hard to argue against either one of those. Now, the only areas where I see maybe we can fiddle a little bit is the Colwood cleanup. I want to hear more about the Pacific Center Family Services request, and possibly the bike lanes. I mean, that would be about it. But again, I added that up and it was about $81,000. So that's less than 1% savings, even if we dropped all those. So yeah, I think we're in a pretty good place. So let's have at her.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Martin, would you like to make a comment? Your opinion?
I'm just happy to comment that Councillor Parkinson basically reflected a lot of my values. So I'm good there.
And I guess you want to hear mine, or maybe you don't want to hear my opinion. So I guess before I offer an opinion here, I've just got one question here, Ms. Hepting, if you can answer this. The surpluses every year that we have, that goes into a reserve fund, and you guys, I believe, we fund a lot of our special initiatives from that fund. So I guess my question is, do we have a bylaw that says what we're supposed to do with surpluses? Do we have to put it into that special initiatives? So where I'm going with my question, so you can answer this in total, is can we use some of that surplus? Say we have a surplus and we take 50% of it and apply it to the following year, like instead of everything going into special projects. It just seems weird to me. It's still taxpayers' dollars, and they should be, it should be paying for the services. So that's my question right now.
Thank you, Chair Kobayashi. So to start, we do have a number of bylaws that specify where surplus is to be allocated. Mm-hmm. In general, anything that is not specified by bylaw, if it's generated through taxation, it simply forms part of our accumulated general surplus. And you are correct, that general surplus then forms funds. It's, when we discuss our reserves that are available as a funding source, surplus is one of those. And so we utilize it to fund initiatives or even capital in some instances. Your second question about could surplus be utilized to fund this service delivery? In my time here, this city has made that decision once in 2020. It was in part how we were able to achieve a 0% tax increase. Specifically, the decision made was to utilize some of the surplus to fund the increased policing operating costs associated with bringing on additional strength. It is not a sustainable practice. Ultimately, at some point, that tax increase will catch up with you, because at some point the city will need to introduce sustainable funding for any recurring expenditure associated with service delivery. And so for that reason, while it has been done, it is not a sustainable practice, and this budget has not been prepared with that as a consideration. And to be clear, if we did utilize one-time funding by way of surplus, we are simply deferring that tax increase to a future year, unless the city determines to not continue with that service.
Okay, I do understand what you're saying. Yeah, if there's some of these that were one-time costs, then it would make sense to do it that way. But from what I can see here, most of these things they're here forever. From what I can see, anyways, that's my interpretation. But you answered my question. So I guess I'm going to be the fiscal hawk here, and unfortunately, I am that way. And again, I just read what I can read in the paper and what's being offered and what other municipal tax lifts are. We are higher than most municipalities. You know, and philosophically, I agree with everything that's been said. We've went through this, and I will have to tend to agree that there's nothing here that's really stand out where you go, oh, this is really bad. But you know, it just comes down to the factor is, you know, I'm going to be very happy to hear from the public on this and what their reaction to this is, because I only have my opinion on this, and I think we're slightly high. I would have loved to have seen it come in, you know, looking at other municipalities and then adding our 1% for our infrastructure, sustainable infrastructure program, which not other comparable municipalities have. You know, I thought we should have been in between the 4 and 5 range. To kept it under 5 would have been a lot nicer to me. That's just me. So, but I think the majority has spoken here that there's no alarm with the current number. You know, I think we'll go ahead and proceed forward on this basis. So anyways, Councillor Day, do you have something else to add to this?
Yeah, so when I was doing my look at our budget, there's one item that did stand out for me, and I have supported it in the past, but I've also heard it mentioned by a couple of other people here. So I thought that this might be the best time to bring it up. And the item is the Colwood cleanup. And I would like to propose that we consider not doing that. And my reasoning is this: it doesn't save you money as a homeowner in Colwood taking your things to City Hall, particularly. It's about the same cost to bring it to City Hall as it would be to drive it out to the dump. You don't have to drive all the way to the dump if you want to think about the green cost of doing things. There are other local businesses in the West Shore who would receive those items. And it hasn't been particularly well used, and it has a fairly high cost in overhead. So I just wanted to float that balloon, and it isn't a huge amount, but it is something that I think doesn't provide enough of a benefit to warrant the city doing it.
So Councillor Day, would you like to make a motion at this time?
I just wasn't sure if this would be the time. I didn't see any process laid out.
Yeah, okay. No, I don't think if I interpret what we want to accomplish tonight, Ms. Hepting, we weren't going to do that tonight. Am I correct in saying that?
Thank you for the question. Certainly, if committee wishes to make a recommendation, please do so. We do intend to have a look at each of the service areas. It may be more appropriate to make the recommendation at that time.
Okay, I'm going to do that instead. Okay,
Sure.
thank you very much. Okay, thanks a lot, Councillor Day.
Thank you.
Any other? You're finished? Okay, Councillor Logan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question. I respect your position on the your discomfort about the increase. Just curious if you have any ideas on what you would do to reduce the 5.48% increase to a level that is more comfortable for you.
Okay, that's a great question, Councillor Logan. I was sort of looking at the same things. I mean, I know that this is not in your favorite book, but I looked at the branch drop off because we do well with that right now. We're increasing it. I don't know if it's money well spent. I looked at two things, very similar to Councillor Day, the Colwood cleanup and the branch drop off. That's a total of 77,000, almost 80,000. It's half a point. That gets us near under 5 points. So that's where my head was. Does that answer your question, Councillor Logan?
Yes, you bet. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Martin?
Great. Sorry, my question was answered. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. So we're gonna proceed on. Jen, back to you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Quick recap on the budget principles that we utilize annually when we compile these financial plans. We just spoke about this briefly about the utilization of surplus or reserves and what they're most appropriate for. So when we are compiling our operating budgets, we are looking for sustainable funding sources. So whether it be taxation or user fees, the capital program, the associated ongoing operating costs, again, sustainable funding sources, taxation or user fees. One-time expenditures, that's where we will be proposing one-time funding sources. Number the city's reserve funds, DCC, or grants, of course, federal, provincial, or other grants. So just high level, that is part of the philosophy that we utilize when we compile these budgets. 2022 service review. So this council met as committee through a series of meetings late last fall. In each of those meetings, we're looking at each of the city's service areas. And again, in 2022, we continued to refine those service areas. In some instances, we restated areas, particularly in the public works related areas. So as we get into some of these operating budgets, in some, our prior period budgets will reconcile to our current financial plan. But as we've redefined some areas, there have been restatements of budgets. The intention and the target is always that where we can best marry up the costs of providing a specific service, we want to ensure that we're capturing those costs within each of the areas. So council heard priorities for areas, council heard what's working well, opportunities for improvement, and ultimately provided direction on whether we were going to maintain or increase service delivery. And so as we get into each area, you'll see at the top of the slide where council has endorsed a maintenance of service delivery or where council has endorsed an increase of service delivery. And so with that, we'll jump into each of the service areas. And just before we start, from a high level, the draft budget that's been published and is part of tonight's agenda, that is our first version. So as we proceed through budget deliberations and ultimately as we return to council, we will be updating these versions. There may be transposition. Well, I know there's transposition errors. Where we've caught some of those, you'll see those highlighted on the slides before you. So this budget will be refined as we continue. Have there been changes to the operating budgets that council was presented in the fall? In some instances, overall, these operating budgets are quite similar. Recall in the fall, we were anticipating an approximate 5.4% increase. Right now, we're just shy of 5.5%. So minor changes. Labor contract changes have been incorporated. We also did highlight public works. We needed to disaggregate the labor budgets based on the refined service areas. So some of those changes have been reflected. But all in all, these operating budgets do approximate what we have previously spoken about this past fall. So with each area, absolute time for comment or questions, but I do intend to really just provide a high level overview. So administration and corporate services, the primary change here is that of the Pacific Center Family Services Association. So if I can draw your attention to the grant and aid and fee for service line item, we are proposing a $228,000 budget. Specifically, we have restated the fee for service budgets associated with economic development related activity over to community planning. So the West Shore Chamber and the Greater Victoria Chamber of Commerce, we've reallocated those budgets, but we have proposed an increase. So currently the City of Colwood supports the Pacific Center Family Services Association to the tune of $115,000 annually. We increased that support last year. So did the City of Langford. They increased their support for the program. With that increase, PCFSA, they were able to hire an additional counselor for their services, and they were able to reduce the wait times for those services. The organization was also able to hire a temporary counselor. Their financial ask of this city, the additional $45,000, would enable them to make that position permanent. And they have also asked for increased funding from our neighboring municipality as well. Superintendent Todd Preston also commented on this service with the policing service review in the fall, in that these counselors also assist with the RCMP community policing program. And so that's the primary change in this operating budget. And so that is an increased service for council consideration. Overall, that change, along with the financial implications of the corporate services restructure in 2021, that's resulting in the change to the operating budget overall. Be pleased to answer any questions the committee may have in this service area. And if there's Chair Kobayashi, I believe you're muted.
Sorry about that. Councillor Jensen, your hand is up. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Jen. I did have some questions around the additional council funds for a counselor. And that was part of it, was whether other communities are towing the line as well. And is this then, will this become a line item for the budget, like in perpetuity then, or is this a single ask for this year, or are they going to keep coming year after year to seek more funding, or what does the future look like for this line item?
Thank you through the chair. So we are proposing funding into perpetuity for this line item. So the city in my time has had a fee for service arrangement with the Pacific Center Family Services Association. We bumped that funding up in 2021. We bumped it up, I believe, an additional $75,000, bringing our annual support to $115,000. We are now proposing for this year and moving forward that our annual support would be $160,000.
So I would be more comfortable if this ask came during service review, so that we can consider it more fulsomely, and yet, because I have questions about, what kind of counseling service did we get? And who is it serving, and how is it serving our community, and some feedback from them and from the police superintendent. I find it, if this just gets tossed at us for another 45K for whatever, I struggle a little bit. That really all we have before us is a line item, and that's it. I don't know how others feel. Obviously, it's something that we're hard pressed not to support because it's a worthy cause, but I would love the opportunity to consider this maybe next year if they have an ask. This can come during service review so that we can give it the full 360. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Councillor Parkinson?
I guess similar concerns to Councillor Jansen, and also I guess overall, when I hear about hiring more counselors, good on them, but can they find them, and what happens if they don't? There's a real demand out there everywhere for good counselors these days, and if those positions get filled and the money gets spent on those positions, as with Dean, I'm certainly having a hard time to object, but I guess we just hand over the money, they fill the position, and if it doesn't fill and they end up with a surplus at the end of the year, that rolls into their operating surplus, just like our surpluses roll into our operating surpluses. Am I correct in that assumption, Ms. Hepting?
Through the chair, correct. And so annually, we receive feedback from this organization on how the funding is spent and utilized. To be specific right now, this organization has engaged a second additional temporary counselor. With the existing funding, that engagement is expected to end at the end of June this year. So with the request for increased funding from both Colwood and Langford, this organization is looking to make that second temporary youth and family counseling position permanent.
So 6 months of our share compared to Langford's share is $45,000.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. Councillor Day?
Thank you. I just thought I'd provide some feedback because I know a lot about Pacific Center Family Services Association and about the COPE outreach program because of my work with the Victoria Family Court and Youth Justice Committee. So just to let you know, the West Shore is underserved by other service providers like through VHA and other health organizations. And Pacific Center Family Services developed this program after Colwood actually developed the program between the fire chief and the chief inspector at RCMP. So the wait times in Colwood for the last year have been 1 year for a youth to see a counselor, more than 10 months. And by adding additional counselors, we are able to reduce that wait time for youth to see counselors. And it is only youth from Colwood who would be receiving the benefits of this funding. And just in terms of concern for, are we going to get an increase every year? These are extraordinary times, and due to all of the stresses of COVID, absolutely every location in Greater Victoria is struggling to meet the needs for counseling for youth, particularly. But in the 5 years prior to the last increase that they received, they had not asked us for a penny more. So that's just for your information.
Thanks very much, Councillor Day. Mayor Martin?
Thank you. I guess I'm not prepared to support this until we actually do get a presentation from the organization. So looking to staff, when could that happen? If it could happen.
Certainly through the chair, I can reach out to the Pacific Center Family Services staff and coordinate and line up a presentation, hopefully for sometime in a future budget deliberation meeting. I'll take that as direction now.
Thank you. I feel the same way, Jen. That's the one issue that bothered me here. I think I just heard you say you do get a report, an annual report from the Pacific Family Center, and I'm going to assume that you're doing the due diligence to make sure that we're paying our fair share or not paying our fair share. I guess I don't know how they keep those stats, or if they're Colwood residents or whatever, and how we pay into this, but that's so I feel the same way as all the comments that have just been made on that issue. So I'm just further substantiating and backing up that I'd love to hear from them, because it is a substantial amount of money that we allocate to them. So my only other question is, I know we do this every year, and I've always meant to ask this question, and since I'm chairing it this year, I'm going to ask the question. But this line that you always use, that taxation per resident, it sort of I scratch my head because I don't quite understand it, because we don't actually tax per resident, right? So it's just a weird number, and I'm just trying to figure out why we have that in there.
Certainly, and it's not a line that we always use. It is intended to provide context. So specifically for each operating area, we may look at other funding that's generated outside of taxation. We then disclose the taxation that's required to support this service area. And then the taxation per resident is simply a factor of that tax required and the BC Stats estimate for the year. And I say it provides context because as we look at future operating budgets, so policing will be a good example of this, where we're looking at increased cost escalation. We can see more clearly where those costs are directly reflective of growth, and where the tax per resident may maintain some stability despite the fact that the operating budgets are increasing. And it's because the city is experiencing growth, and we do have increased expenditures related to that growth.
Okay.
So to
Well,
answer your question, it's simply it's a metric to provide some context on those budgets.
As long as it's not a form of birth control. I don't want more kids. I'm paying more taxes. Now, it's just a comment. Actually, one of the taxpayers asked me, so I'm paying more because I got more kids? No. That's how I interpreted it. So I wanted to make sure that I had the right context behind it.
Yeah, it's important to be clear that it's a metric for context. We do not tax per resident. And so if you're looking at that, that could be misleading.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Please proceed.
So communications, this is the first year that we've established a standalone operating budget for our communications and engagement, events, public relations service area. This operating budget really has not changed since service review. And the primary driver for that 6% increase in the operating budget is we have reallocated software budgets that are directly related to our communications tool. So specifically in this instance, the Let's Talk Colwood platform that we utilize to engage with our citizens, the costs that are supported with that now are reflected within this operating area.
So there's a commensurate decrease in the IT budget, I would assume, correct?
Yes, offset by
Right.
increases, which we will talk about. Correct.
Any questions, council? Seeing none, please proceed, Jen. Thank you.
Finance service area, we are looking to maintain the service in that area. Two factors I wanted to highlight. Similar to that of corporate services, this area did experience a restructure, and the financial implications of that restructure are factored into the operating budget. Moving forward, we highlighted this during service review. We are proposing additional funding to support asset management, specifically both within the finance and within the engineering service areas. As we move forward with asset management and as we start to really identify some of our shortcomings, if you will, so specifically both the tools and how we administer the information, how we track our infrastructure, how we track work that we do on our infrastructure, we are recognizing the need for resourcing. When we get into the capital budget, we'll talk about some of those software enhancements. As we get through the Tempest installation, we will be looking at specifically enhancing our timesheet software so that we can improve the accuracy of where we are costing information. Also, the work order or job costing, it's very much manually done right now. And so again, integrating that information, both from a financial planning perspective, but also in terms of how we maintain our assets and ensuring that we're capturing the maintenance at the right times, and maximizing the useful life of those infrastructures. When we move into the engineering service area as well, we'll have a look at the proposed increased funding to support not only asset management, but specifically enhanced GIS. And so these are future budgets that are being proposed. They are very preliminary as staff explore how we can address the challenges in these areas. I'd be pleased to answer any questions that anyone may have.
Any questions, council? So just a couple quick ones from me, Jen. So if I understand it, that is actually for people. That's what the costs are there. That's a people cost then, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So to be clear, we're proposing labor budgets both in the areas of finance, engineering. We're also proposing software budgets.
So who's doing that right now?
Much of that work is not happening, or it's simply we have an electronic timesheet system.
Okay.
It is not as savvy to cost. So for example, our fleet is not tied to the usage of our team.
Okay, thank you very much, Jen. Please proceed.
Another newly created operating budget as we establish a separate service profile for that of our HR services. We are looking to maintain this service area with the previously approved increased service. So we did increase our HR servicing effective January 1st of this year to support a growing workforce, introduction of an HR coordinator. That is the primary driver in the change in this operating budget. Be pleased to answer any questions.
Any questions, council? Seeing none, I'll let you proceed, please.
IT, we just commented reallocation, so you'd expect to see a decrease in the IT operating budget. That decrease has been offset by the increased, specifically licensing and maintenance costs that are associated with new software, and specifically with the Tempest software. Configuration is well underway, and the first phase of that product we are looking to go live at the beginning of Q2 this year. In addition, Council previously endorsed increased service delivery in this area, and we're realizing the full cost implications. And that was for additional staffing that was introduced in 2021. Again, pleased to answer any questions that Council may have in this area.
Councilor Parkinson.
Thank you, and not, I guess, partly in this area, but I've been sort of tracking these as we went through. And so the communications cost per resident went up by 6.2%. Corporate operating went up by 6.9% per residents. IT is 12%, finance 6.7%. And I think you said there was an overall 3% bump for just the cost of doing business, 1 year after the next. And yet these numbers all seem to be coming in quite a bit higher than that. Am I missing something here?
The overall 3% does not factor in the previously approved increases in these areas. So for example, in IT, that $50,000, when we talk about our tax increase overall, that's sitting below the line it is not rolling up into that existing service of 3%. It's within the increased service that was previously approved. So if you look at the sum of those two, you are at 6.39% increase.
Sorry, say again, Jen?
Sorry. When we refer to, we're looking at approximately $550,000 to support increased services that were previously approved.
Mhm.
Included in that amount for the services that the service areas that we've just reviewed, the HR coordinator, the increased IT resourcing is included in that amount.
Okay. Okay, so, but the ones where there isn't an increased thing, corporate services, I don't think we had an increase there. Finance, I'm not sure we did. Anyway, at some point, we have to get back down to 3%, don't we? I mean, 3% plus, I'll grant it, the new positions and stuff are in addition, but I'm just watching it and waiting for some good news, that's all.
When we refer to the restructure and the financial implications, that's primarily in the area of corporate services, finance, public works, engineering and development, but we are proposing the utilization as well of new construction taxation. So specifically, we are proposing to utilize a portion, that $97,000, to support existing service delivery. And so if we go through these budgets and we try and track the increased the increased operating budgets associated with existing service delivery,
Mhm.
there is a portion of new construction taxation that is funding some of that. And that in part is why the core property tax increase is 3%. It would otherwise be higher if we were not utilizing some of our new construction taxation.
So if what I'm understanding, a straight apples to apples comparison of what people were doing last year versus what they were doing this year, not adding in new staff or anything like that, would be 3% plus the $97,000. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes. There was minor increases in other operating revenues that have otherwise mitigated the need to increase that taxation. But otherwise, yes.
So, and then I guess the question got to be asked, are we running a tight enough ship? You know, is that sort of a acceptable number? You know, the 3% plus the 97.7, does that, yeah, is that as tight a ship as we could or should be running? And I don't have an answer to that. I don't really expect you to have off the top of your head. It's just, I think something perhaps as council we should think about. And tonight is probably not the time, but thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Parkinson. Councillor Baxter? You're on mute, Councillor Baxter.
Okay, I'm unmuted now. I just wanted to give Councillor Parkinson some good news. When we get to building inspection, that doesn't actually have a cost to the residents at all because it's all paid for fees. And when we get to development services, it's actually been a drop in cost per resident. So it's not all, and of course, that's a much bigger budget than some of the others that have gone up 6% or whatever. At least it's bringing a smile to his face. Thank you.
Thank you. Don't see any other hands. Please proceed, Ms. Hefty.
So as we move into fire rescue, an increased level of service was endorsed coming out of service review. And last night, We heard the detailed background that's driving the financial implications of the paid on-call transition. And so this operating budget, we're both realizing the full cost implications of the introduction of 2 additional career firefighters. And in addition, this budget factors in committee's recommendation last night, which also mirrored what was presented and discussed during service review. In addition, moving into 2023 and 2024, there is a proposed operating budget to support enhancing the city's emergency support services. You may recall during recent service reviews, we spoke about how we've been working with View Royal Fire Rescue to enhance our emergency support and our EOC services for the city. This proposed budget moving into 2023 and 2024 is consideration of, once we get that program enhanced and up and running, that there may be a staffing component to support that program moving forward. And so that is the additional proposed operating budget in this area. Be pleased to answer any questions that you may have.
Council, any questions? Seeing none, please proceed, Ms. Okay.
You may recall during service review when we spoke about the policing services, Superintendent Todd Preston referenced a cop per pop. Specifically, when we look at what policing strength is targeted for the population, and a reference was made to 1 police strength per 900 residents. This draft budget continues with the increased annual policing strength, an increase of an additional 1.0 per year. Previously, we'd approved that just up to and including the 2022 year, which would bring our policing strength, to 20.6. Moving forward, this draft budget, as was mentioned during service review, proposes that we continue with that increased strength annually. And so that by 2026, we would have policing strength of 24.6 members. This would result in that target of approximately 1 to 900. Primary cost pressures in this area, when we look at our contracted policing services, the RCMP policing contract was finalized last summer, 2021. We still have not received formal updated costing estimates. Our current forecasts do not factor the recent contract settlement financial implications in. That being said, we have been verbally given updated information, and that is the primary driver of the additional approximate $200,000 that we're looking for just to maintain the necessary funding for our existing policing force. Then we have the increased policing strength we've spoken about, and then the e-com dispatch costs. So we were notified about 10 months ago that the current cost share arrangement between the federal and provincial government will be transitioning over to the participating local municipalities. Like I mentioned at the beginning of tonight, I have not received any formal information, any updates on that other than the initial notification that we received. This draft budget has been prepared with the expectation that we will be prepared to fund that effective April 1st.
Is there potential for it to be retroactive to the first of the year, or do we do it on the federal budget cycle?
Thank you for that question. Based on what we've been told, there is no potential for that to be retroactive, the e-com. And I would suggest there is potential for it not to come online this April 1st.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Day?
Thank you. I understood you to say that you have included in our budget plan to increase the police strength by 1 officer every year up until 2026.
That is correct.
So there was no council direction to do that, correct?
No explicit direction other than the background that was provided during our service review. So specifically that targeted policing strength is what drove this budget compilation. But you are correct, no explicit council direction other than the increased strength for 2022 as was previously approved.
Right. So I'm not comfortable with planning our financial plan to increase the police strength at a time when we don't know so many issues about our policing strength. And it could potentially limit our options in the future. So I would like to approve those if and when the dust settles and that is a direction that we choose to go. So those are my thoughts.
Okay, thanks very much, Councillor Day. Councillor Jensen?
Yeah, thank you. I recall making a motion and asking for support from council there to move in that direction to with the linkage from population to our officer cadre, and I believe that passed and was supported. So I believe that we've already had that discussion, and obviously each additional officer increase from year to year is subject to the budget approval process, but in principle, I believe we moved in that direction philosophically. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Any other questions on policing for Jen? Seeing none, I'll let you proceed, Jen. Thank you.
So as we move into the area of building and bylaw, mentioned during service review, this is the first year that we're proposing an internal reallocation to better line up funding with the respective service areas. So if you were to look at the building and bylaw revenue and then look at the total funding for this area, you'll see that the total funding for this area has dropped. And that's because these budgets propose an internal reallocation, 15% approximately to reflect the time and resourcing spent in the development services area, and then 10% to reflect the time and again, resourcing spent in the area of engineering. And so we've shown those reallocations within the service profile operating budgets. Overall, with the exception of this internal reallocation, we are anticipating building permitting revenue to maintain stability over what was budgeted last year. As we move into the operating budgets, building inspection, we have had a restructure of our inspectors, and that is in part what's driving the increase over what would otherwise be a 2 or 3% increase at that 6% level. And I will pause. I do see a question.
Yes, Mayor Martin.
Thank you. Staff, can you tell me, what am I looking at that I haven't already looked at through service review? I feel like I'm missing something here because I feel like we've done this and I'm just trying to understand what I'm missing and what I should be observing that I didn't observe during service review.
Thank you. And to be clear, during service review in this area, the operating budget looked almost identical. We have made a revision to the forecasted budget for the 2022 permit fees, but other than that, you have seen this information.
No, and I'm sorry, I'm not just through the chair. I don't mean this specific slide. I mean every service plan that we're looking at. Is there something in these service plans that I should be observing that we have not discussed previous?
Through the chair, to answer your question, These service plans are virtually identical to what was presented during service review. That was one of the changes in the more recent service review, was that we were presenting updated operating budgets for consideration. One of the takeaways coming out of the 21 service review and last year's budget deliberations was that we wanted to have more accurate budgeting to support the proposed service area changes for council consideration.
So I'm sorry, but I'm still struggling. So can you tell me what is the difference between what we did at service review and what we're doing today?
Service review is an opportunity for council to meet with each of the city's service areas, to meet with those teams, to understand what the current priorities are, what the future priorities are, what's recent successes, challenges. We also highlight the operating budgets for those service areas. As we move into financial planning purposes, those operating budgets have been refined. In some instances, the numbers have not changed at all. In other instances, we've updated, for additional information between when service review ends in November and when budget deliberations begin.
I'm sorry, through the chair. So are you highlighting, is there a highlight here of the changes that are different between November and now? Like, I guess that's where I'm trying to figure out what I'm looking at that's different.
Certainly. On this slide deck, I have not explicitly highlighted the changes. As we get into each service area, I am commenting. So for example, the Pacific Center Family Services, that was new information. That figure was not on the operating budget in the fall service review.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Day?
Sorry, I've been waiting a while. I had to think about it. I'm just wondering about the reallocations. They didn't stand out to me in service review, but from what you said, I'm sure I'm probably just not remembering it. But I'm just wondering, why are we doing a reallocation to development services?
Thank you, through the chair. In part, in an effort to improve the accuracy of some of the information. So specifically, we are disclosing the taxation that's required to support the service delivery. Without a reallocation of building permitting fees between the areas of development services and engineering, it could be suggested that we're overstating the taxation that's required to support that service delivery, because in part, some of the resourcing required for development services is to support the building activity. So the building permit fees do in part fund not only the associated costs of building inspection, but some of the costs of development services. And I'll be clear right now that that internal reallocation is really an estimate based on my conversations with the teams in those service areas on how time is being spent. I mentioned previously the shortcomings in our timesheet tracking software. So as we look to enhance that, we can get more specific and granular about where our time is being spent, and in turn utilize that information. One, to review fees, are the fees sufficient for the resources that are being incurred to provide those services?
Right. So when we write our bylaws, our bylaws are, we're not allowed to recover more than the cost of the service. But it's pretty obvious by your reallocations that they never have covered the cost of providing the service.
building, development, and engineering are areas where we need to continue to look at those fees that are charged and get more granular about the direct costs associated with those areas. As we've kind of highlighted in recent budget years, there are also existing costs that regardless of whether or not there is explicit building activity or development activity, there's still some resourcing that would be required regardless of whether or not that there is that activity. And so an argument that taxation should support some of it. But the extent to that, we don't have with granularity in these budgets.
But we're building towards that?
That's the intention.
Okay, thank you.
So my question is along the same line, Jen. So I just learned something from Councillor Day. We aren't allowed to have, they should pay for themselves. So what happens with because there's net revenue from these, right? From this particular, from building and bylaw. So what happens with that funding? Where does that go? What is that like? You've got a budget of 1.1 million. Funding for 1.1 million and a cost of 950,000. So what happens? Where does that money go then?
Well, part of what we need to appreciate is that there are additional costs of providing these services that are not allocated within these operating budgets. For example, consider overhead, consider CFO time, administration time. There is overhead with building permit delivery, with engineering service delivery that's not explicitly allocated in these operating budgets.
No, I understand. You just click. Thank you. I do understand that now. Thank you. Yeah.
And it is our intention with each year that passes, we continue to refine these so that we can ensure one, that we're not overcharging for services where user fees are utilized, but and also the flip, that we're not looking for taxation where a user fee should be supporting the service.
Okay, thank you. No other questions, please proceed, Jen.
So moving into community planning, sorry, one moment. And so this is an operating budget where we have restated over what has been seen in the past. Specifically, we've included heritage and the library within this operating budget. The amount of the budget has changed from what was presented during service review to the extent of approximately $25,000. That is in part because of that restatement of the fee for service related to the West Shore Chamber and the Greater Victoria Chamber. As well, we are looking at creating a sustainable annual placemaking competition budget. You may recall last year we had a special initiative budget. This operating budget proposes ongoing support so that the city may endeavor on something similar annually. The Greater Victoria Public Library, I did want to highlight, there was a suggestion during service review, how are these requisitions allocated? So for the Greater Victoria Public Library, it's half based on our assessment and then half based on our population estimates. And so this year, our share, we are seeing a 2.4% increase. That budget figure, so our requisition is approximately $900,000. Our core operating budget for the library is almost $950,000. We received word late last week So in addition to the requisition, we are also responsible for our proportionate share of the Juan de Fuca branch, both maintenance and capital contributions. And we received those estimates late last week, and they have come in about $17,000 below what we have budgeted here. So we will reflect that change in the next version of the budget. And so that will be a small savings in the operating budget there. Be pleased to answer if there's any questions you may have.
Seeing none, please proceed, Ms. Epting.
Development services. When we look at the fees that are anticipated, we are anticipating a budget of closer to what actualized in 2021. That being said, this also shows that internal reallocation of 15% of building permit fees to support the resourcing in this area. Development services operating budget, we are seeing a slight increase. Again, that restructuring that we've mentioned, that's being offset by a reallocation of legal budgets elsewhere. Really very little change to this operating budget to what was highlighted during service review. If there are no questions, I'll proceed to the next.
Please. You're good.
Engineering, we mentioned during service review that it was our intention to split out the operating budget associated with that of GIS services for the organization. So that is a change that has been reflected in this budget before you. In addition, the operating budget to support engineering administration and specifically recent restructure in this area has been updated to consider those financial implications. What is not explicitly highlighted in this draft financial plan, but will be in a future version, during service review, we spoke about proposed increased funding to support enhanced GIS support moving into future years. So specifically, we are looking at additional resourcing for 2023 and into 2024 to support additional staffing for the GIS function here at the city. Pleased to answer any questions. Otherwise, we'll be moving on to the public works related areas.
I don't see any, Jen, so please proceed.
So public works, the primary change in the operating budgets for the public works areas from what you saw during service review and what's before you tonight is that related, specifically if we look at that first line in the operating, the administration and training. During service review, we had a lot of the labor related, specifically benefit budgets rolled up into that line item. We have since reviewed each of the service areas and disaggregated those budgets, which is why you're seeing that swing in this operating budget. And then there's subsequent increases in the other public works related areas. And I do want to take a moment. All of the city's funding for COVID response related activities, with the exception of our fire, are centralized within this budget. So moving into 2022, we are looking at maintaining the enhanced facility cleanup costs that we have been funding through the COVID Safe Restart Grant. Specifically, we have enhanced our cleaning facility of city facilities, City Hall, the Public Works facility, but we have also enhanced the cleaning of parks washrooms. And so we've captured that within the parks operating budgets. This financial plan proposes that enhancement just for the 2022 year and then sees that activity fall off. Similar with everything COVID related, we continue to monitor And I did mention fire, and I didn't comment on anything during the fire operating budget. And that is because we've treated that as a standalone special initiative budget, which we will get to next week. But as it is related, we have been utilizing some of the COVID safe restart as we've increased our staffing at the fire hall. And so we have implemented a night shift, and we have been utilizing some of that grant funding for that. When we move down below the existing core operating expenses and we look at enhancement to the branch drop-off program and the Colwood cleanup. So we spoke about both of these activities during service review. The branch drop-off program historically has been approximately 24 activities a year. Last year, we increased the number of activities, and we funded that one-time increase through use of the COVID grant. This draft budget, and as was mentioned during service review, proposes that we maintain that increased level of activity for our branch drop-off program, moving it up to about 45 events a year. In addition, the Colwood cleanup activity, that was removed from the 2021 operating budget as an outcome of discussions and decisions during the 21 service review. We have reinstated that budget here. And there was discussion earlier tonight about that item in particular. And so if committee so wishes, a recommendation on whether or not to maintain that activity within the financial plan could certainly be made at this point.
Thanks very much, Jen. I think it was Councillor Day that wanted to, Councillor Day, I'll recognize you, and then Councillor Jensen, you're on deck.
Okay, I'd like to propose that we remove the Colwood cleanup from the budget.
Okay, discussion. Councillor Jensen, or is that your hand up for another?
No, I was going to second Councillor Day, and I realized that it's
You don't need a second.
unnecessary. So, I was going to speak to this as well. Oddly enough, I pushed this last year, as you recall, and I believe you all shot me down. I don't take it personal, but I thought this is a well-received benefit to our community that was sorely missed. And I'll tell you what, I didn't have one person reach out to me as a result of canceling that last year. And I believe that this is an area that perhaps we can give a little. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Councillor Logan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I won't be supporting it. It's a very small percentage impact on the budget. And like I normally do, I partook in the branch drop-off last weekend. And one of the comments that was front and center from the public works staff that was there were the questions about the spring cleanup and the excitement about the possibility of it returning. So there seems to be an expectation out there that it will be returning, and I didn't support it last year, much to Councillor Jansen's chagrin, but certainly I will be supporting it this year. I think it's for a small cost, it has a big impact. Thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Parkinson?
I don't see who's online anymore, but I wonder, I see, I think Rob Boyle was online to begin with. I wonder if we get some feedback from staff, either positive or negative on this.
I see Rob Boyle. Rob Boyle, would you like to make a comment on that?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, there's mixed feelings about spring cleanup. It is a fee for service. We can provide it. It is convenient for people. There are a number of other alternatives available to the public now that were not available when it was first envisioned. But this way, for public works, if you ask us to do it, we'll get it done.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Boyle. Seeing no other comments on no other hands, I will call the vote. If I can get a show of hands for those that are against the proposed motion.
Sorry, Chair, can I get a clarification on the motion? I feel like there might be a double negative that I'm voting against, so I'm not sure. Am I voting for this to be in the budget or for this to be not in the budget? I'm not sure what the motion is.
Okay, I heard it being, well, I'll make it clear. I believe if you're okay with me stepping in here, Councillor Day, but it was to remove this item from the budget.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Baxter, sorry, I was calling a question. Is this just a residual hand or, sorry, maybe I didn't see your hand. Oh, you're muted, Councillor Baxter.
That's a vote against the motion.
Oh, okay. Any other hands? So the motion is to remove this item from the cleanup, and I wanted a show of hands that those against the motion. So looking, I see Councillor Baxter and Councillor Logan are against the motion, and Councillor Kobayashi, Parkinson, Councillor Jensen, Mayor Martin, and Councillor Day are for it. Okay, just lower your hands. And at this point, if I may, I would like to make a motion also. I would like to see, and again, I would love to hear in the discussion, I would like to see the removal of the enhanced branch drop-off for the 51,100. You know, with these two items out, it gets us below the 5, which is a big issue to me. But I would certainly, again, love to hear, you know, just as a good reminder from Mr. Boyle on this issue. I'd love to hear your opinion. Mr. Boyle?
Thank you. Through the chair. Enhanced branch drop-off, it was derived from the COVID in trying to provide a physical separation and issues with people lining up and the whole 9 yards. However, as some of the councillors have mentioned, they've been in branch drop-off, they've known the lineups. They have been extensive, they have impacted the surrounding area of City Hall by offering it only on a limited time frame every third weekend or every second weekend. Offering it every weekend has been a service that has been well received. It is reasonably easy enough to manage. We are progressing to look at enhancing that service and providing it in a different way. It just requires a bit more thought, and we'll be coming back to council with that in the future. Those are my thoughts on it. I think it's a good thing. It seems to be more received where people don't have to schedule their branch drop off or where they're dumping their branches. It's a convenience.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Logan?
I absolutely agree. And again, as a frequent user of that service, it is one of the most beloved services that the city offers, period. And there's a reason, as Mr. Boyle had suggested, we expanded it. It's to meet the demand of our residents. So, you know, I would challenge those that don't think it's necessary to go and talk to the people that actually participate in that service to understand just the value that that service provides. And it means that our public works crew isn't picking up the crap on the side of the road either. That has been an issue in the past when we didn't have enhanced service. So I am very firm in opposing any reduction in this service.
Thanks very much, Councillor Logan. Councillor Jansen.
Yeah, thank you. Much the same commentary. My household is there regularly, and lots of great feedback from participants. And I think it's something that we don't collect our community's garbage. This is I guess a close second. We'll collect their green waste and deal with it appropriately so it doesn't end up in vacant lots and parks. Thank you.
Mayor Martin.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm also supportive of the increased services. I have actually been called by people to come down when we were only doing it once every 2 weeks, and I actually witnessed backups that took all the way from down Wishart all the way to Machosen Road. The lines were that long. I also know that other jurisdictions, people in View Royal and Langford try and sneak into ours because they don't offer it in their jurisdictions. And it's definitely an enhanced service, just like our snow plowing. I think it's what separates us from other municipalities, and I'm quite proud of the service. So I will continue to support it.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Okay, guys, I surrender. I heard you loud and clear. This will be the first time I made a motion and voted against my own motion. Okay, I'm going to call the question. Those that oppose, could you please raise your hand? Opposed. Yeah, opposed. Yeah, so that's me too. Okay, so that's everybody. It's unanimous. So there's a first for everything. Thanks a lot, guys. So we'll move on. Jen, thank you very much for your patience.
Of course, so moving on to the road service area. As you recall, we're looking to maintain this service delivery. In terms of changes to the operating budget since service review, we have increased our sidewalk maintenance budget, in part as a response to what actualized this year and recognizing the impact of, simply put, additional infrastructure in the municipality and the need to maintain that. The increased bike lane maintenance. So you see that's the $8,200. We increased this service in 2021. The proposed additional budget is to simply enable more frequent sweeping of bike lanes. And so that is for council's consideration. And should committee wish to make a recommendation, now would be an appropriate time. Pleased to answer any questions you may have on this service area.
Seeing none, we shall move on. Thank you.
Parks, trails, and recreation, excuse me. Since you saw this operating budget during service review, we have refined both the inclusion of the COVID funded related facility operating work, so specifically the enhanced cleaning in our parks. We've also updated the operating budget to support West Shore Parks and requisition. And I did misspeak last night. We're actually looking at an additional $70,000 to support our contribution to this society. I believe last night I commented that it was approximately 40,000. And I did want to highlight that requisition is based on our proportionate share as represented by our assessment only. The Greater Victoria Green Team. We have had a fee for service arrangement with this organization for a number of years now. They have approached the city requesting an increase in the funding to support increased service delivery. And that has been incorporated into this operating budget. That information was not known during service review. So just to take a moment, the city, we increased our support to support 5 events, I believe, in 2021. The request here, the organization is looking to do 7 activities and in addition a free activity, so 8 activities total. They're anticipating the total cost would be $20,000 and they're looking for Colwood to support $15,750 of that. And so we've incorporated that incremental cost for council's consideration into this operating budget. In addition, as you heard during service review, the proposed increase to support irrigation systems for the city's parks. And that funding is proposed to take in effect this year, and that enhanced service this year. And then moving into 2020, and I'll pause, I see we have a question.
Okay, Councillor Parkinson.
Just relating to the green team, I think we've also expanded. I think it was the communications department, might have been corporate services for a volunteer engagement assistant. And so I'm wondering, isn't this the same? Aren't they both doing the same thing? Won't the volunteer engagement thing be looking at, having citizens get together to tackle projects like this? Are we duplicating when we do that?
Thank you for the question through the chair. I'll share what I'm aware of, and then perhaps if there's other staff who can articulate further. Yes, you're correct. We are looking at establishing a volunteer component to support an array of city service delivery. The Greater Victoria Green Team absolutely relies on volunteer support and works with local school districts to support parks and trails maintenance specific activities. So their focus, certainly with the extent of the work that they do with the city, is on parks and trails specifically. And I don't know if there's any member of the parks team to further articulate on the work that the Greater Victoria Green Team does with us. And I don't believe our communications manager is in attendance tonight. And she would be best versed to articulate the intentions of the volunteer coordination work that we are embarking on. I do see Rob Boyle, so I will turn it over to Rob to comment.
Mr. Boyle?
Hello, thank you, Chair. Actually, I was just going to volunteer our newly engaged Parks Manager to comment on the Green Team's activity and how that proceeds in clarity for Councillor Parkinson's question. Gord, I believe you're online.
Yes, hello. You're right that there is a little bit when we're looking at the Green Team. We've used the Green Team for many years, but the volunteer program is also working with stewardship groups, and I think that's where it's focused, where the Green Team comes in essentially doing the same thing, but organize events throughout Colwood, whereas part of that, and I could be wrong here, but part of that volunteer coordinator would be coordinating not only the Green Team, but helping with the Green Team coordination and communication, but also helping coordinate stewardship groups throughout Colwood.
Thank you. Mr. Earl?
Thank you, Chair Parkinson. Sorry, Chair Kobayashi. I believe during the special project discussion, Ms. Russell will be able to talk more specifically about the special project that we have on volunteer engagement. Certainly the Green Team does a fantastic job of generating the volunteers needed to help with the work that they do in our parks. But the volunteer engagement plan goes much beyond that to other areas of gathering Colwoodians who would like to volunteer to deliver a wide array of services beyond the Green Team's reach.
Thank you very much. I just have a quick question here. Jen, just you talked about that increase the green fee team. I thought you said 15,000, 15,000 something, and on the sheet here it's 8,300. So, I see that's 2022, which is this year. So I'm confused. So is that just the increase, and then the rest of it's buried under the parks and maintenance beautification? Is that how we're supposed to interpret that?
That's correct. The existing amount that we support the organization is within the parks maintenance and beautification line item.
Okay, thank you very much. No other comments, questions? I think you're good to go, Jen. Thank you.
So moving into boulevards, the operating budget here really is as it was disclosed during service review. This is another one of our service areas where we are proposing an increased level of service based off of last year's financial plan and the previous service review. So in particular here, we are proposing increased resourcing to support hanging baskets, as well as the necessary staffing component to enhance those beautification services. And should you have any questions on this area, please let us know.
Councillor Day?
Thank you. I'm just looking at the difference between what was approved in 2021 and what the actual was. Is there a story there? Because it's significant.
Sorry, thank you through the chair. I'm just pulling up the detail I have on that
Okay,
area.
thanks, Jim.
We are seeing that some of the labor resourcing was redirected to the roads works. And beyond that, if Public Works wishes to specify specifics on that area, otherwise I'd have to return with more detail on why we actualized lower than anticipated.
Yeah, so I think there's about $71,000 there. So I would like to understand, because like Councillor Kobayashi, I would like to try to trim our budget a little if we can, if it's reasonable. I don't want to not maintain something that is just going to cost us more next year, but I would like to maybe revisit this if staff need time.
And I do see that our Public Works
Yes,
manager has.
the chair recognizes Mr. Boyle.
Thank you, Chair, and to Councillor Day. Yes, I do believe to bring information, if you wanted to trim this budget, we would bring back some information going forward. I do believe we reallocated staffing component because the beautification hanging baskets is a very heavy staffing component. And I don't think in the COVID climate, it was felt that we should be moving forward with that. And I think that's where we made a decision, but bringing you back a version of cost savings would come in the future.
Perfect. I'd love to see that at one of our other budget meetings so that we could be sure that we're making the right choices here.
Right. Thank you very much, Councillor Day. Any other questions for Ms. Hepting at this time? Seeing none, let's proceed on, please, Jen.
Storm sewers service area. You'll recall this was an area where we did enhance our service delivery in 2021. That being said, we did not fully actualize implementation of the enhanced closed storm sewer system maintenance works. Moving into 2022, we are realizing the full cost implementations, and the intention is that we will actualize this program and we will move to full implementation this year. No other changes to the operating budget from what was previously presented during service review.
So just a quick question here, Jen, on that then, and maybe it's Rob that has to answer this, but we didn't actualize it, as you said. Was it a resource issue then? We didn't have the resources and therefore we didn't do it. So, show me that this will happen this year, I guess is the question. It goes back to the question that Councillor Day had before. We have these budgets and we're underachieving. Is it a resource issue, or or is it just a high budget number? Mr. Boyle, do you have an answer for that?
I will attempt to have an answer for that. To be acceptable. Yes, actualizing this line item was a staffing component. I didn't realize due to the ongoing reorganization of public works, as you may or may not be aware of. And we are hoping to fully actualize it in 2022. There are two components to it. One is a staffing component, one is a resource component that is external. Basically, it's contracted service. Those things have to be combined. So
I understand.
it's interesting.
Thanks very much, Mr. Ball.
Okay.
Any other questions? Mayor Martin?
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate the topic. And I'm struggling because if I go back and I have a look at, for example, if we go back to boulevards and what I heard from staff was that the reason it was budgeted at 373 and we only spent 302 was because of reallocation. But when I go back and look at roads and everything, I don't see an increased cost that would mirror the cost that went down. And I'm really struggling to understand if this is a labor issue. We put enough. We've given you, as far as it's my understanding from a budget standpoint, we gave you the budget to have enough staff in place. So is the question that we were not able to hire that staff, or we reallocated that staff to another line item, but I don't see the correlating line item issue. Like when I go back and, for example, look at the roads operating budget. So can I get further clarification? I hear what you're saying about external contractors and internal contractors, but I don't understand still. So I need a better explanation.
Certainly through the chair, I can jump in first and then turn it over to Public Works to further articulate their work plan and work area and what actualized. There was some labor that was redirected to other service areas. So when we look at what actualized in the spend in the roads area, we're at just over $700,000. The operating budget was closer to $660,000. There's absolutely a component to each of these services that does represent supplies and other items supported. And so if that full service activity is not done, it's not just the labor that wouldn't be spent. There's also additional budgets. But in terms of what hiring did or didn't occur, that would be a question for our Public Works team.
Mr. Boyle?
Don't want to keep repeating the same thing because I'm probably sure you're done tired of it. Public Works is going through a significant reorganization, and in part of that is to allocate staff into the specific service area plans. No small feat. I wish it was a lot simpler than it seems to be. So we are getting more clarity and more granularity to the allocated funds. In answer to Mayor Martin's questions about where the funding went, I'm not going to mix storm drainage with the hanging basket versions or the funds that were spent that way. If I said before, if more clarity and more granularity was requested for that one line item, we will provide it in due course without a problem.
Thanks very much, Mr. Boyle. Does that answer your question, Mayor Martin?
No, but I'll look forward to further information coming from staff.
Thank you very much. Councillor Dave.
Thank you. My question is for Jen, and it's just it's a process question, but I think it's important that we all understand. So when we build a budget and we say that, you know, this much is for storm sewers and this much is for roads, should that be coming back to council when the decision is made to instead of spending it on storm sewers, you're going to spend it on roads?
Through the chair, absolutely. We are required to, one, we provide quarterly financial updates. And so at those times as well, we will articulate how our spend is actualizing. And in the area of public works, we will provide comment on what activities perhaps haven't actualized as anticipated, or where we've had to reallocate existing resources to other service areas. Roads is one that comes to mind, and was certainly a topic that was commented on during our quarterly update in 2021. So to be clear, there is absolutely an expectation that we will, as we establish budgets and then we report out on how our spend actualizes, that we are being clear and providing that clarity, not only for council, but also for the public as well.
So it certainly could be just, that my memory is faulty, and that's certainly becoming more real every year. But I don't recall seeing any choices brought to council. So I think if we do that, perhaps a good idea might be to keep some sort of a record to remind us when we get to this stage what we already approved or choices that we've made, because it often feels on council as if once we've approved this budget, it feels sometimes like it's far out of our control.
Any comment on that, Jen? No. Good.
Certainly, I perhaps clarify the use of the word choice. It depends on what we are reacting to. If we pull our third quarter financial update, which was the last comprehensive financial update received prior to the service review, that's where we've highlighted our spend in some area impacted because, for example, public works crews were redirected to support sewer connection activity. Council establishes the level of service that we aim to provide. Administration, finance, we work with our service delivery teams to articulate and understand the components and the resourcing required to deliver that service. And then we absolutely monitor that throughout the year, report out on how it's actualizing. This profile before us, we comment that we did not fully actualize as intended the enhanced closed storm sewer system. So that's the kind of information that's really important. And then as we get into service review, that's a huge part of the financial planning compilation process, and where we provide the background on these areas, on challenges that we've had in these areas, on opportunities, and provide the background on what we anticipate to spend in the year, and what service delivery we have achieved versus what expectations may have been set, during the previous service review.
Yeah, I understand it, and I'm very appreciative of the work that you do, and that it's large and complex and convoluted. But I'm just trying to let you know that for myself, I often feel like I'm in the back seat, not in the driver's seat. So when these things come up, when you're talking, I hear you saying, we decided. We spoke to other members of the team. We weren't able to do that. We report out in the quarterly report. That's not the same as asking council, do you want to do it this way? So I feel like we're often watching what happens in the city. It would be nice to feel like there was a choice, and maybe there isn't really a choice. Maybe it's, between something that you don't like and something that you like even less, but to have a choice would be good. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Councillor Dade. Councillor Parkinson.
I'm going to take sort of a different tact from Councillor Day. I believe that one of the huge advantages that the city has is the flexibility of its public works crews and employees. The fact that, you know, it may well be that the guy who thought he was going to be doing storm sewers for the next little while is called away because there's a rush on some road jobs and stuff like that. And the fact that these guys can move from one to another, to me, certainly is more beneficial than to say, and we've got every hour tracked exactly to the right place and look, we're exactly on budget on all our things. I could see perhaps an overall public works where we take all these things that you've spent so much time breaking down into the different components and sort of say, and in summary, our public works costs were budgeted as X and came in at, you know, Y or X or whatever it might be, you know, so we could see if these things like we see in the storm sewer where the actual is quite a bit less than the approved, you know, we could see whether overall they're balancing out and it's about right or not. But I don't think I want to get too fussed as a councillor on whether Mr. Boyle sends his crew to work on storm sewers or boulevards on a particular day. I think he's more than capable of making those decisions within the overall budgets we've approved. So I don't have the concern. Probably the opposite from Councillor Day. I would worry that we spend too much time trying to be, you know, absolutely perfect on timesheets and not enough time on fixing potholes and cleaning storm sewers. So I have faith in the staff to do the work that needs to be done and to make those priority adjustments during the year. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Parkinson. Mayor Martin.
Thank you. Just looking at the storm pond maintenance, 2021, we budgeted $20,000 and we didn't spend anything. Do we have to spend money on 2022 since we budgeted for 2021 and we didn't spend anything? So would that be a line item that we could help with our budget? Or vice versa, maybe staff can explain why we spent zero on storm pond maintenance when we budgeted 20,000.
Mr. Boyle? Or actually, Mr. Earl, I guess. Mr. Earl.
Thank you, Chair Kobayashi. The lack of spending on storm pond maintenance is also related generally to the lack of spending in this area. As described, we're going through a restructure in public works, and part of that restructure is to establish new leadership in the area of utilities. We have successfully done that now, and we anticipate that new leadership team will be able to hire the resources necessary to execute maintenance items such as storm pond maintenance. Storm pond maintenance is absolutely necessary. Maintenance of our storm system in general is imperative. It's I think close to $100 million valuation, and if we don't maintain it, it won't last its useful life and we'll end up having to replace it. And lack of maintenance on ponds can lead to overland flooding, which can have a real and direct impact on ratepayers. So at the end of the day, we didn't hire in time in 2021 to achieve the additional maintenance that we had hoped in the area of storm ponds, but we have now done that, and we anticipate a much greater ability to execute the 2022 budget.
Thanks very much, Mr. Earl.
So, Chair, my comment, if I may, my comment to that would be, if it's absolutely necessary that we're maintaining it, we should have maintained it in 2021. It's a real concern for me that when I hear my CAO telling me that something should have been maintained, and we see through budget it wasn't, and that's something that shouldn't slip through the cracks if it's something that's absolutely necessary that we do. And that's my one concern about that line item. Thank you, Chair.
Excellent point. Thank you very much, Mayor Martin. Councillor Baxter.
I'm sympathetic to the idea that we should get later on in this process a more detailed explanation of exactly why some of these changes occurred, just for the peace of mind of council. But in supporting what Councillor Parkinson was saying, I'd just like to point out that Public Works does its job in the weather, and weather often redirects what they need to do. It could be the weather in the winter, or it could be the heat dome in the summer. And increasingly, that the weather is going to affect how Public Works uses its resources. And if they need to deal with a weather emergency, they have to do it. I recall one year when we ended up spending well over $50,000 cleaning up after a windstorm. None of that was budgeted. It was a windstorm. Nobody had seen the like of it before, and people who would have been doing other things had to be allocated to that work. I'm not saying that happened in the last year, but other things do happen. So that's one of the reasons why Public Works need that flexibility to be able to reallocate resources. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Baxter. Any other comments or questions? Back to you, Jen.
Thank you, Chair Kobayashi. So with that brings us to a conclusion. We have reviewed all of our operating areas with the exception of the sewer utility.
Great. Thank you very much.
And perhaps for committee's benefit, what I've heard tonight, we are going to ask the Pacific Center Family Services Association to return and present to committee to further articulate the ask. Staff, we are going to review the operating budget to support the service delivery in the area of boulevards.
Yes.
And we have received one recommendation to remove the resourcing and related activity of the Colwood cleanup program.
That is correct.
And so we will next return next Wednesday, and we will start our review of the city's special initiatives and capital program. Anything that we don't complete next Wednesday, we will return on March 1st. We will also have a look at the sewer operations, and in particular have a conversation about proposed changes to both sewer connection fees and sewer user fees. March 1st, we will then look to wrap budget up, pending any further direction or recommendation from committee. Thank you.
That's a great summary, Jen. Thank you. I've been making the notes here. So I guess my last question, if you can maybe summarize this, I think there are a few potential upsides for us, and it might be a timing issue too. What I'm talking about is e-com, when they're going to implement that, it might be later than April. So there might be potential savings. There might be some on the boulevards potentially, right? The biggest downside that I've seen, if I would just want to, if I'm summarizing this correct from what I understood and heard, was the on the RCMP side, because we did a guesstimate of of what that uplift is for the cost of the RCMP, right? Because we don't have a solid number there. Is that the biggest risk that you see in this budget right now?
Correct. Thank you for the opportunity. From a high level, when we want to comment on risk, our new construction taxation is an estimate based on the information available today from BC Assessment. Historically, what is estimated tends to actualize within 10%, give or take. So that's important to keep in mind, that additional $1.2 million, that figure could change. The policing e-com, that is one that we have no definitive information on when that will actualize. And some participating municipalities, from what I've heard, are choosing not to budget. Others are choosing to budget. And so that is one of the line items that could be up for consideration. And tonight's recommendation on the Colwood cleanup program, that brings that lift down from the 548 closer to 5.31. I also mentioned a nominal amount related to the library operating budget, and we'll get that reflected. And as we continue through this process, we will ensure that there's a version control so that we can keep track of the changes that are being reflected throughout the different iterations.
That is my next question. Thank you very much. That's great, Jen. Anything else for us then, Jen?
Not from me tonight. Thank you very much.
You did a great job, Jen. I could tell you right now, this was much better than last year. It wasn't as painful this year. And I thank you very much for that. So it's just going to get better and better as we go along. At this point in time, I'm looking for a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Thank you very much. See you. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Night, everybody.
Night all.